Hi there, welcome to another Q&A live. My name's Rebecca, and for the next hour, I'm here to answer all the questions you might have about preparing for OET. So if you're planning to take OET later this month, or in June, July, or even a little bit later on in the year, and you have some questions that you'd like to ask about the test, about what you should be working on right now, then this is a session completely for you. And as I said, we work our way through your questions in the next 60 minutes. So if you're joining us live on Facebook, please use the comments under the Facebook post to add your question. If you're joining us live from YouTube, then similarly, please use the comment box under the post to ask your question there via YouTube. And both sets of questions will come through to me, and I will answer as many as I can in the next hour. So it's great to see so many of you joining us already. We've already got 100 candidates joining us live today. 90 of you are from Facebook, and another 10 are from YouTube, and more are joining us as I continue speaking. So welcome. I hope you're doing well today. It's pretty early in the morning for me here in Australia. But I know different parts of the world will be joining, maybe from America, maybe from the UK, maybe from Europe. So welcome to all of you, whatever time of day it is. And let's have a look at the questions that are already starting to come through. So hello to everybody joining today. Here's a question that has come through from Dorothy. Let me just get rid of this overlay. So Dorothy is asking, is the speaking subtest done on the same day as the other 3 subtests? So yes, Dorothy, the answer to your question is yes. The speaking test is usually completed after the other parts of the test are done. And this is scheduled, and your timetable is sent through to you usually within a week of your test day. So look out for those emails if you've got an exam coming up. And if you haven't received your email and you feel like it's less than a week to go, then make sure you're checking your spam and junk folders as well, in case the email has ended up there. Anusha is asking about listening part C. What are your tips to crack listening part C? So listening part C, as you know, are 2 longer recordings, both about 5 minutes in length, and each recording has 6 multiple choice questions to answer. Now, before you listen to each of those 2 recordings, you do have 90 seconds to read through the questions, and those 90 seconds to me are probably more important than the 5 minutes that you're listening, because if you make the best use of those 90 seconds before the audio starts, then you're in a much better position to answer the questions accurately once the audio does begin. So during those 90 seconds, I would aim to try to read through the questions twice, quite quickly, obviously, because you've only got 90 seconds. But first of all, just read through the 6 questions themselves without the answer options. Look for keywords in those questions that are going to help you know when the topic is moving on. And then once you've looked at the 6 questions, the keywords in those questions, look again through as many of the answer options as you can in the remaining 90 seconds, and try to identify from the answer options what makes them different. Because if you can do that, if you can maybe underline 1 keyword from each of the answer options, which shows how it is different from the other ones, then when you're listening, what you're actually doing is listening for those words of difference rather than everything and trying to work out which is the correct answer or not. So those 90 seconds to me are really invaluable. Hamid is mentioning I am applying for remarking. Please be merciful. So I think this is a good moment for me to mention how marking and remarking is done. There's unfortunately no possibility for examiners to be particularly kind or particularly strict to candidates. Assessment is done through a very standardized and controlled fashion. And this means that every time a candidate takes the test or goes through remarking, the exact same process will happen. And for reading and for listening, the process is that reading and listening parts B and C are computer marked. They're multiple choice questions. And the way you complete those parts of the test means they can be read and marked by a computer. And so for reading and listening, only part A is marked by a human. And two separate assessors will mark both parts A for listening and reading. And they're given what we call an answer key to mark your papers. So they have the answers that are allowed to be considered correct for listening and reading part A. And they just go through those answers and match them with yours. And if you've got the correct answer, you'll get the point. If you haven't got the correct answer, then they can't give you the point. And it's important, particularly with reading part A, that you have spent a few extra seconds when you're writing down your answers to make sure they are spelt correctly. Because you're copying your answers directly from one of the texts, if you have misspelled something, the assessors will score that one as wrong, because it is part of the instructions for the test on all of our practice tests and on your live test. So that is something, unfortunately, that the assessors will be strict about with reading part A, and that's different to listening part A. In listening part A, the assessors are able to be flexible with spelling because you're trying to hear and write at the same time. So there is some flexibility there around your spelling for listening parts A. Mithun is coming from a similar perspective, asking about the test on April 11, suggesting that most of the students got C+ in speaking because the task was easy. Now, this is a really understandable perspective to reach. If you look on our Facebook page after the test, you're most likely to see students telling you that they've been successful, they've got the scores that they want, or that they haven't got the scores that they want. You never really get candidates who are anywhere in between. So when it comes to results for any part of the test, I'd like to reassure you that every time there is a test, a significant cohort of candidates do get exactly the grades that they want and are able to progress to registration with the regulators that they're hoping to apply to. Some candidates obviously won't get the scores that they want, but it won't be because the test was particularly easy that month or more difficult that month. As I mentioned before, the test is standardized, and part of that means that the difficulty of the test is set to be the same every month. So there's maybe a slight difference between the challenge, which comes from new topics and new questions being written each month. But these are balanced out with the way that the test is assessed. Now, when it comes to speaking, each time we have a test, there are multiple roll cards available for each profession, and the interlocutor chooses two of those roll cards to be used for each candidate. In fact, it's set which roll cards are to be used for each candidate, and that means that there's quite a variety in roll cards that candidates will see on test day, but they're all within the same level of difficulty. So candidates will get a particular score because they have met the assessment criteria for speaking or writing, not because the test was easier or more difficult that month. Ringu has a question about writing. Do we need to write all the signs and symptoms if provided in the body paragraph, or can we write definitive symptoms of a particular condition? Ringu, this will depend on who you're writing to and what you're being asked to write about. If you're writing to somebody for whom the symptoms, even if there's quite a long list provided in the case notes, would be significant, so they can understand exactly which of those symptoms the patient is displaying and perhaps which symptoms are not present. Then of course you do need to include those in your letter. However, if the patient has since been diagnosed with a condition during a hospital stay, for example, then you wouldn't need to include perhaps all of those symptoms. You can just go straight on to saying that there's since been a diagnosis. So it does really depend on your reason for writing. There isn't one perfect answer I can give you. You have to make sure that you're looking at the case notes and your reason for writing to the reader and choosing the most appropriate information to include from those couple of things. Lamasti is asking also about the writing test. I want to ask, in an emergency or urgent referral, how should you organise your letter? Some review centres are telling different things. So Lamasti, it's good to know that you're feeling that some review centres aren't giving you consistent information. This could be because the review centres that you're interacting with are not ones that we would particularly recommend. We know that there are some really good review centres out there, but also there are some review centres that we would suggest are not particularly good quality. They don't have qualified teachers and so forth. So in the comments, I'm just adding a link to the list of review centres, of preparation providers that we do recommend because they've completed very extensive training with OET, and they can be trusted for giving you accurate information and supporting you with your goal to be successful in OET. But to answer your question, what you need to do when structuring your letter is to structure it in order of importance for the reader. Now, this can be done in a number of different ways depending on the situation. But if the situation is an emergency or urgent, then the reader is going to be most interested in what has just happened to understand why this situation is an emergency. And so for that reason, we recommend starting with the most recent information so that the reader has that clear understanding from the beginning, what is the reason for this being considered an emergency situation. For other types of letter which aren't particularly urgent or an emergency, then you can use different types of organization, perhaps a thematic structure or a chronological structure, but you're always trying to put yourself in the reader's shoes and to think about which structure is going to be most clear to them, help them understand quickly the different information that you have to communicate. Anju is asking about clubbing. Now, this is a term used particularly by nurses, and this allows them to combine test scores from 2 test sittings. So some of the nursing regulators allow candidates to combine their results from 2 test sittings to achieve the scores that the regulator wants from 2 test results. So you need to really contact those regulators directly because each regulator has different requirements about the scores that they require. Australia has different requirements to New Zealand, for example, and the UK has different requirements to Ireland, and America, the different states also have different requirements for nurses. So it's best to check directly with the regulator to find out what scores they require, but also whether you can combine your test scores and what the minimum scores that you can have if you are combining your test scores. Mojde is asking when the writing task is about conception, conceiving, should we include the name of both partners in the reference? So Mojde, from my understanding, official OET case notes will only ever have one person as the patient, and that person will be the person that you write in the reference line and will focus the content of your letter on. Now, it could be that there is another person in the family that is linked to this person and the reason for writing about them. But they won't be the patient, the main focus of writing to the reader. So they wouldn't be part of the reference line. You would just introduce them as an important part of this patient's history and include them where relevant during the letter. But only one person will be the patient for your letter in official OET case notes. Riaz has a question about speaking, how to counsel an angry patient who has been infused mismatched blood, which has now been managed but is angry. So it's worth mentioning that for the speaking test, you may get an emotional response from your patient because, as in real life, patients will sometimes be unhappy with the situation. They might be anxious about the situation. They might be frustrated about the situation. But for OET purposes, the emotional response that you have from your patient in the speaking test won't be as extreme as angry, or you won't ever see a patient shouting at you or crying in front of you. The emotional responses are more moderate. So as I mentioned, it might be the patient is upset, they might be frustrated, they might be anxious, but it's not so extreme that they are losing control of their emotions during the speaking test. So Riaz, the question you have in mind isn't one of our official practice tests. So I would suggest that this isn't a task that you're going to find during the test. And particularly, you're not going to see that angry response because that level of emotion is higher than ones that we would use on test day. Question from Ruby that I did cover briefly when responding to a question earlier, which was on reading part A in particular. So I'll just cover this question as well, just to repeat that answer. With listening part A, the assessors are able to be flexible with your spelling. Obviously, we encourage you to be as accurate as possible for your spelling when you're writing your answers. But if you are not sure how to write the word particularly, then to spell it as it sounds is the best idea. And provided the assessors can read that and understand that that is your answer and it is the correct answer, they will be able to mark it correct, even if you haven't spelt it 100% exactly. A few other questions coming through on that, so I'll skip over that. This question coming through from Femi on YouTube: can you give some tips for reading part C, please? So with reading part C, you have 2 longer texts and 8 questions to answer on each text. Each question has 4 multiple choice options to choose from. So these questions by themselves do have a fair amount to read. And for that reason, we don't really recommend candidates start each text by trying to read through the whole text before looking at the questions. Some candidates who find it important to have a global understanding of what the text contains might find that useful, but we would only recommend that if you have the ability to quickly skim in a couple of minutes. For most candidates, this isn't going to be necessary, and we would recommend simply working at paragraph level on the paragraph that the question is particularly referring to. Now, like I was mentioning with listening part C, you can do a fair amount of work with the question before checking the answer. And in reading part C, again, the focus should be on reading the question, trying to understand what are the key words in that question, what is the question asking you to find out as an answer. And with reading part C, we actually recommend, before looking at the answer options, maybe covering them up with your hand, reading the question, and then trying to find where in the paragraph that answer is located. You might not be able to find the exact answer. The question might be slightly too broad to be able to do that. But if you can go to the paragraph and find where you think the answer is contained, it then narrows down, when you look through the answer options, which ones you already feel are more likely to be correct or not. And then you can focus perhaps on those one or two answer options with that part of the text that you identified to make a decision about which is the best match for that question from the paragraph. It's also a good idea, it's good training, particularly as you're preparing. And if you've got a few months to prepare still for your test, to train yourself to find evidence for why each answer option is incorrect, as well as why the answer option is correct, because that just gives you that double sense of security that you have found the correct answer, because you've also been able to prove why the other answers are incorrect. Briar is asking about whether it's okay to study OET from upper intermediate level. Briar, this is a good moment for me to mention OET Pulse, which is a new product from OET, very reasonably priced. Particularly at the moment, it has an introductory offer of 15 Australian dollars, and it can be purchased from the OET shop. And this product, OET Pulse, is particularly designed to efficiently and reasonably quickly tell a candidate what their current level of language is, and therefore whether they are ready to start preparing for OET. So the way that OET Pulse works is you complete 3 sets of questions in roughly 30 to 60 minutes, depending on how long it takes you to answer those questions. And the questions are based on listening, reading, and language knowledge. And from completing those questions, the answers that you give to each question will decide the level of the question that you see after that. So it's adaptive. It means the questions will go up if you're scoring correctly, or go down if you're scoring incorrectly. And they'll keep shifting about until by the last question, the test has a very good understanding of what your current ability with English is. And so you'll get a result which you can map against an OET grade, as well as an email of advice about whether you're absolutely test ready now. You can book your test, just do some practice test questions while you're waiting. Whether there's a few areas that you need to work on, and perhaps you should wait to book your test for a few weeks or a month or two, or whether there's actually quite a few weaknesses in your language and you need to work on those before we would recommend booking an OET test. So do check out OET Pulse, find out some more details. You can also find on Facebook and YouTube a video that my colleague Alex produced recently, which showed you inside OET Pulse what to expect if you do purchase OET Pulse and how those results will look and so forth. So a really good recommendation if that is something that you're thinking about. Am I ready to take OET Pulse at the moment? So let's just remove that again, go back to the questions. Moises says, in the writing subtest, should we include all the information given in the discharge plan in our letter? So this is true for all of the case notes, not just the information provided in the discharge plan. When making a decision, do I include it or not? You need to decide, is it relevant to the reader, and is it relevant to the current situation that I'm writing about? Now, the discharge plan information in the case notes is likely to be relevant to the current situation. but not all of it may be specifically relevant to the reader. It may be relevant to other healthcare professionals that are going to be involved in this patient's care. So you may not need to include everything specifically, or it may be that you start your final paragraph with everything that relates particularly to this patient and this reader, and then maybe mention the other things as information depending on how linked, how related they are to the reader, or you may omit some parts completely if it's not linked at all to the way that the reader will be caring for the patient. Sally is mentioning, I'd love to improve my reading and writing, but I noticed I haven't focused for a while as I have so much going on. I think motivation and consistency is the key here for success. Thanks for sharing that, Sally. It's an interesting perspective, and I would totally agree with you. And I'd also add one more word there to your motivation and consistency. I'd also say stamina. To me, stamina is a really important part of particularly reading and writing. And it means that to have the ability to continue concentrating and focusing on what you're doing for the hour that there is for reading and the 45 minutes that there is for writing. Particularly when you consider after you've done listening, you need the stamina to then do reading straight away. After you've done reading, you need the stamina to continue with writing straight away. So you do need to build up your stamina to be able to concentrate for those three tests, one after the other. And even in listening, I find myself, if I'm doing a practice listening part C test, that I need to really develop my stamina to focus on the listening audio, for the 5 minutes, because that's quite difficult. It is quite heavy concentration, and if I'm not focusing intently for all of those 5 minutes, my brain will wander and I'll start thinking about something else. So absolutely, you do need to think about your levels of motivation, how consistent you can be in your preparation, and to build up your stamina. And be kind to yourself. You know, if your test isn't coming up for a few months, but life is particularly busy right now, be kind to yourself, give yourself a little bit of a break, and then come back feeling refreshed and ready to be more focused and motivated again. If your test is coming up, then perhaps you need to be kind to yourself by letting go of some other things, trying to get family and friends involved to take over some of your other responsibilities so you can just focus on getting ready for your test. Padma has a question about, during the test, am I allowed to underline or mark my question paper? So the answer to that is yes, you can. Your question paper is yours to use as you wish, and that means you can circle, you can underline, you can make notes, you can make other marks on your test paper. The only part of the test where there's a limit on that is writing, and that's during the 5 minutes reading time, which comes at the start of the writing test. During those 5 minutes, you're not able to make any marks on your question paper at all, but you can do that once the writing time starts. Marcel says, do you have any quick method for reading part B? So my approach for reading part B is pretty similar to the one I gave for reading part C. And actually, if you start using it for reading part B, it will help you to get better at reading part C as well. Reading part B, of course, has 6 questions, and they're all about one short text. So one question about one text. And compared to reading part C, you only have 3 answer options to choose from, so slightly less to work with. But again, my approach would be to read the question, covering up the answer options, and try to find the answer, or at least the section of the text containing the answer, before I check the answer options, because by doing so, I've already identified for myself what seems to be a really good match, and it reduces the information I then need to pick out from the 3 answer options. One of them, hopefully, will already be very close to the answer I think is the correct one. And so then I just work with that answer to check, yes, it is correct, and to try to find some evidence for why the other 2 answers are incorrect. Anantha Krishnan is saying, is it right to write? I am writing to refer. Absolutely, that's one option for starting your letter. It isn't the only option. There are many different ways you can start a letter, and you are encouraged to use an opening to your letter, which is particularly appropriate to the situation that you're writing about. So I am writing to refer could be a good option for your letter, but don't expect to use it 100% of the time. Nithu is asking, how much score do I need to get in reading out of 42 to get a B score? So the way that listening and reading is scored is, as you've mentioned, each test has 42 questions. Each question is equally weighted, so each question is worth exactly the same. So there isn't a different score for listening part A or reading part A compared to reading and listening parts B and C. They're all the same. So at the end of the assessment, you have a score out of 42. Now, as I mentioned at the start of the session, the test is standardized to mean that it is equally the challenge is equal from test to test, but because there are new topics and questions used, the pass score for listening and reading is flexible. And that means if the test is slightly more challenging than another test or slightly easier than another test, those pass scores can just move slightly up and down to make sure that every test, all candidates have the same opportunity to get the score that they want from their test result. And that means when you're preparing for the test, we can't tell you that you have to get this score out of 42 to know that you're going to get a B grade. What we do recommend, though, is during practice, if you're consistently scoring between 30, 31, 32, then you should feel comfortable that you can get a B grade on test day. Obviously, we wouldn't aim for the minimum. So obviously, if you can get a 30 now, keep trying to improve, get as high as you can in your preparation, because the higher that you get, the more you can relax on test day, knowing that you can be pretty confident that you're going to get the score that you want. Ringu says, if the patient is a known case, do we need to introduce in speaking? So, for example, if the patient has been admitted to hospital and today is day 3 or day 4. So when it's clear from the background information on your roll card that you've met this patient before, they're a regular patient of yours, or like Ringu has mentioned, they've been being cared for you for a number of days in hospital, then when you start the role play, there isn't any need for an introduction. You don't need to explain who you are and your role. In the case of the patient being in hospital and it's day 3 or 4, you might start with, hello, it's Rebecca again. How are you doing today? Something like that, because obviously in hospital, the patient will see a large number of staff. But if it's in a clinic setting and this is your patient, they come and see you regularly, then you don't need to introduce yourself. You might greet them by their name. Hello, Ringu, how have you been since I last saw you? Something like that would be very appropriate and a way of demonstrating to the assessor that you have a good variety of language, perhaps with the other role play where you might need to use an introduction because it is a new patient. Cindy is mentioning whether there are going to be any changes to upcoming tests. And the answer to that question is no. There are no planned changes to the test. So the information that we have on test day is correct. The practice materials we have is accurate are those that are used for the current test. So you can use those to prepare and to feel confident that you understand the test situation and how you're going to find the test on test day. Just going to look for some more different questions to the ones that I've already answered. Andrew has a follow-up question about clubbing. So Andrew, as I mentioned, please do contact the regulators to understand all the information that you want about clubbing. As I mentioned, each regulator has slightly different requirements, so I don't want to give out the wrong information during this live session. Yasir is saying, do you have any tips for reading part A? So reading part A, you obviously have 24 questions to answer, 20 questions to answer in 15 minutes. Now, that means that you need to be completing a few questions in under a minute, and that will allow you more time perhaps to answer some of the gap fill questions or sentence completion questions, which may require a little more time to work out. Our main advice for reading part A is to complete the questions in the order that they are written, because they are designed to help you to find the answers more structured, in a more structured way, So with reading part A, the first set of questions is simply to find which text contains the information required. So very quick to answer either A, B, C, or D. And if you complete those questions first, then you're already getting some insight about what is contained in the different texts, which will allow you to more quickly find the information you're looking for the remaining questions. So that would be my main piece of advice for reading part A. The other piece of advice would be, if you can't quickly find an answer, perhaps in about 20 seconds, then move on to the next question. It might be a little bit easier to find the answer to that one, and you can then come back to the question that you missed towards the end of your time, if there is a few bits of time left available to you. RHS says, why don't we get feedback on our result? We need feedback to know why we got low marks on that particular subject. I can completely understand your request, RHS. This isn't a feature of high stakes testing though. OET is the same as other tests in this regard, in that we don't offer candidates feedback on their results. Partly the reason for that is literally logistics. If we had to provide feedback for every candidate on their result, it would take much, much longer for us to be able to provide you with the results. And for candidates, the most important thing is knowing if they've got the result they want, so they can then move on to apply for registration and so forth. So from a logistics point of view, it just isn't possible. But equally, as I mentioned, it's not something that testing can provide. However, with the numerical score that you see in your results, you are able to see where you sit within the letter grade that the regulators require. So you can see where you have strengths and weaknesses in the 4 tests, which do help you to know which areas in particular you might need to do some work on before you apply to sit OET again. Lan is saying, are we allowed to write on the paper during the 90 seconds of listening part C? Absolutely, you can. You can circle, you can underline, you can make notes, whatever you feel helpful during listening part C. Manju says, why is there no centre in Kuwait? So Manju, thank you for your question. We often get questions from candidates where there isn't currently a test venue. We are looking to open more paper-based test venues, but we're also planning to very shortly reopen computer-based testing. in different locations around the world. And certainly going forward, where there isn't currently a test venue, we do hope to offer more computer-based test venues in existing venues with our partners Prometric, who run the testing for us when it is computer-based. So do keep your eyes and ears out from OET for updates about computer-based testing and where those locations are going to be, because we do hope to make the test much more accessible once computer-based testing is available. Anantha Krishnan is saying, where is speaking evaluated? So all parts of OET is assessed here in Melbourne in Australia. So regardless of where in the world you take the test, all test papers are returned to Australia, and our one very large, but one team of assessors complete the assessment here in Melbourne. So as I said, it doesn't matter where you take the test in the world. This is another way in which we can standardize the assessment because we have one highly controlled team of assessors that all undergo the same training. Alice is asking about whether in the writing test the Oxford comma is particularly a focus. Alice, sorry, I would say the answer to that is no. In letter writing, we are obviously using commas and other punctuation to make communication clear, but I feel like the Oxford comma isn't going to be a particular feature of that. It's not something particularly for candidates to worry about. It's much more important that they are using commas correctly to separate information in clauses, in lists, or perhaps to separate names from other parts of the sentence, to define information and so on. So the Oxford comma isn't something I would be particularly focusing on. Thank you for all the comments coming through. Here's another question from Sally. If ever I include a few case notes that are not so important for a reader, how does it affect our score in the content criteria? So Sally, actually including information that isn't so important or perhaps even irrelevant for the reader wouldn't have any impact on your content score. It would have impact on your conciseness and clarity score. So just to briefly cover those two assessment criteria, content is checking whether you have included all the information the writer needs to be able to continue care for the patient, and that information is accurate. Conciseness and clarity, on the other hand, is checking you haven't included information that the reader doesn't need, and therefore your letter isn't any longer than is necessary. You're not making the job of the reader more difficult by including extra details or writing in length about things that could be covered off much more briefly in the letter. So including irrelevant information would impact your score for conciseness and clarity, not for content. This question is saying, I've attempted OET 4 times, but I haven't yet got the required score. Last time I was getting 330 for listening and reading. So hopefully this means you are making improvements between the tests. The advice obviously is that you need to work on those skills because simply by, retaking the test, you're not going to improve your score. Each test is different. And so you're likely to make the same mistakes again from test to test if you're not spending time trying to improve your score between your test papers. Now, we do have a lot of information on the OET website to help you with the skills that you need. And a really good place to start with that is the OET Masterclass. And even if you've taken the test already, there's some really good information in those masterclasses about what skills you need to work on and focus on. And I'm posting a link to our Prepare page now in in the comment box. But also it may be the time, if you've already taken the test 4 times, to enroll in a course with one of our preparation providers that I mentioned earlier that we recommend. They will be able to do some analysis with you of your listening and reading to work out what's going wrong, maybe where the weaknesses are, maybe is it caused by time? Is it caused by misunderstanding of the questions? Is it one part particularly of listening or reading that you're struggling with? And they can work with you on that quite intensively to improve your skills. So maybe this is a moment to do some stopping and thinking. If you have made some improvement, but you haven't been able to get to the score that you want on your own, it may be time to get involved with some help from a teacher. Mohammed is asking a question about a test paper on the 9th of May. So Mohammed, I'm not at liberty to discuss test papers with candidates, and neither are candidates actually at liberty to discuss it with each other. Outside of the test room, those test papers remain confidential, and that is an agreement that candidates sign when they sign their test paper during the test. So this isn't something I can discuss with you. I haven't seen the test papers for any of the tests, so I don't know the answer to your question, but as I mentioned, it's also confidential. Kirsty says, are we penalized if we're not able to finish the OET speaking subtest? For example, if you were talking about the last bullet point, but you're not able to finish. So Kirsty, you don't have to complete all of the dot points, the tasks in your roll card to be able to get a B score. The main focus with the speaking test is the way that you're communicating with your patient. And so provided you have communicated effectively, with empathy, and you've listened to your patient, you've responded appropriately, not finishing all of the tasks isn't particularly significant. Obviously, you should try to work your way through as many as you can by managing your time, but the communication aspect is much more important. Ansi is saying, if the exam is booked in one place and it's deferred to the pandemic, whether I can get another exam centre without cancelling the test. So Ansi, please contact our help desk team with this question. They will be able to assist you, particularly if your test had to be deferred because of the pandemic. The best way to contact our help desk team at the moment is via live chat, which you will find on the website. You can find it on those pages that I've already linked to in the comment boxes. It's a green question mark, which shows up on the web page. You can click on that and chat directly with one of our help desk team, and they'll be able to assist you with that. Alice is suggesting whether it's okay to write on the test papers. Some test papers are adding instruction that it's not allowed to write on them. If you're a candidate and you are at a test where the test centre is giving out those instructions, please ignore them, and please then report that experience to OET at the end of your test day, because that is incorrect. You are allowed to write on your test papers, and you are able to underline, to circle, as I've been mentioning during this session. And so the information that test venue has given is incorrect. And it would be helpful to know that after your test day, so we can correct that misinformation coming out of test venues. It shouldn't be happening. All of our test venues go through training, and we believe that that wouldn't be the case for most test venues. Shristi is saying, when will OET on computer and OET at home start? So do watch this space. I believe that the news about when OET on computer at a test venue will start is going to happen very, very soon. And we'll be announcing when bookings will open for that soon. OET at home is going to take a little bit longer. There are a few more steps involved in that process that we are finalising, but we will have information about OET on computer at a test venue coming up very soon. Freebird is asking about whether OET will be conducted in India. So all around the world, OET is obviously following the advice and the restrictions placed on test venues by their local governments. So we won't run the test if it's unsafe to do so and if restrictions are in place. And we have a website or a web page, on our website which focuses particularly on the pandemic and any restrictions that might be in place. So you can check that page for the most current restrictions. Any candidate that is impacted by restrictions will also be contacted directly by OET. So I'm posting the link to that webpage into the chat box now. You can go there to check whether your test is impacted. But as I said, you will also be contacted directly by OET, and it could be another good opportunity to check spam and junk folders if you feel you should have had an email from OET and you haven't received one. Ria says, in the reading task, if the question is about matching, then one word can be used once, twice, or more times. When you say word, Riaz, I believe you mean the letter of the text. So in the matching questions, which are the first set of questions in reading part A, you are just writing down the letter of the text, A, B, C, or D. You can definitely use those letters more than once in that first section of questions. Another question from Freebird, which is, if we choose 2 words in the blank, will they count it correct? So in listening and reading part A, there's quite a specific answer that you will either hear on the audio or that you'll find in one of the texts. And you only need to write down the words from that specific answer. You don't need to include any additional words, try to write a complete sentence or anything like that. So if the specific answer is 2 words long, then absolutely write down 2 words and that will be considered the correct answer. In case you are asking whether you've written down 2 options because you weren't sure which one is correct, in that case, that would be considered wrong and you'll score 0 for that question. You must choose one final answer, but that could be 1 word, 2 words, 3 words. It will be a word or a short phrase, but you cannot write down more than one answer option that you're unsure of and expect the assessor to choose which one is the correct one. They have to score that sort of situation 0. Elsa says, please, can you explain about the writing introduction? So Elsa, the start of your letter is very important to the reader to understand why you are writing and who are you writing about. So those 2 pieces of information are very essential to include in your introduction. And this is what we call the purpose of the letter. You need to make it clear to the reader from the beginning, why are you writing to them, what you are expecting of them to do in a very general sense. So including that information is your focus for that introduction paragraph. Samar is saying, how do we write numbers in general? So for the purposes of your letter for OET writing, you can write numbers in digits or in words. So both are accepted, digits and words for your writing. JK says, in reading part A, is it particular with spelling and capitalization? Spelling, yes, because you're copying your answers directly from one of the texts. you must spell those answers correctly. Capitalization isn't a particular concern, though. Again, we would just copy the capitalization that is used in the text to avoid making any mistakes. But you don't need to worry so much about capitalization. Spelling you do need to include correctly, sorry. Riyadh says, can you please tell me what will be reading paragraphs, meaning it can be an article related to research or abstract, how we can improve reading? So Riyadh, you're right. The reading texts will be academic types of texts that healthcare professionals would generally read as part of their ongoing professional development. So absolutely journal articles on research, reviews of research that have been written, which perhaps combine different parts of research from different providers. These are the types of articles that you will be expected to read in Reading Part C. And if you visit the test information pages on our website, you'll find that as an example for reading, and I'll link that in the comment box, you'll find some links to different resources that will be useful, particularly for Reading Part C, including journals and so forth, to help you improve your reading. Wang is saying, I'm desperately looking for OET pharmacy material, especially for speaking and writing. So Wang, I'm going to direct you to 2 different places to make sure you found all of the materials that we have available for pharmacists. So on the OET website, on the sample test page, we have 4 writing and speaking tasks for every profession, so including pharmacy, and those are freely available for you to access and to make use of. Then in the OET shop, we also have preparation material for all 12 professions. And again, for pharmacy, as with all the other professions, we have a practice book, which includes test tips and 3 complete practice tests. So again, containing pharmacy-specific materials for your version. So posting a link to the shop in the chat now. Beyond that, if you want further practice materials, contacting some of our preparation providers that I've mentioned a couple of times during this session. Some of them offer pharmacy courses, and they have designed their own pharmacy materials, which they have had checked by OET to make sure they are of good quality, and also obviously can support you, providing you feedback on your writing and speaking if you do engage in a course with them. So that's another option for you as a pharmacist, or if you're also another profession looking for more materials. Rafi says, what's the maximum number of words needed in listening and reading Part A? We don't set an absolute maximum, but as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the answer is either going to be a word or a short phrase. And a phrase is usually perhaps 3 or 4 words in length as a maximum, but there isn't an absolute set maximum, but you're not going to expect a very long answer. I would suggest nothing more than 3 or 4 words for any of the answers. Rihanna says, in listening, if they say combined treatments, but in my answer, I only write combined treatment without the S, would it be considered wrong? Rihanna, that would be scored correctly. This is an example of the sort of flexibility that the assessors can show to your answers. And missing off that S wouldn't make your answer considered wrong. Bindu said, is it allowed to write a 34-year man? Bindu, it would be correct if you added old, a 34-year-old, and then you don't need a hyphen between old and man, then that would be correct. All right, I've just actually noticed the time. We've come right to our final minute, and I hadn't noticed. I was working my way through those questions and realizing just then that I've reached the end of my time. So thank you so much for all the questions that you have asked today. I'm sorry if we haven't managed to get through your question particularly. I do these Q&A lives every couple of weeks, so I will be back in a fortnight with another one. You're very welcome to join me then, and I hope you do. Meanwhile, next week, I'll be back for one of our half-hour live chats, which are a much more informal opportunity for me to find out how life is treating you during this pandemic. So join me for that if you can. In the meantime, please stay safe, take care, keep doing the amazing work that you're doing, and I'll see you all again very soon. Thanks for joining me. Bye for now.